So the first video on my channel was called Tariffs Are Dumb, where I explained how tariffs tend to backfire if they aren't executed properly. When that video dropped, tariffs were only a concept of a plan, but Liberation Day has come and gone, so let's see how things are going.
Is it okay in the short term to have a recession?
This. Look, yeah, everything's okay.
So, what the actual F is going on with these tariffs? People are struggling to see what this is all about, including the people who are leading us in this trade war. It's starting to look like China is the focus, but I finally figured it out. This really is all about Japan, and it's always ever been, specifically 80s Japan. Back then, Japan was putting out city pop bangers, the Yakuza was in their prime, Bosozoku gangs were running the streets, and the economy was booming. And this guy was real salty about it.
Japan comes over to this country, they're buying up Wall Street, they're buying up all of Manhattan's real estate.
If you ever go to Japan right now and try to sell something, forget about it, Albert.
So how'd they do it? After the war, Japan was basically destroyed. Manufacturing, infrastructure, gone. Most of the country was a blank slate. The US was in control for a few years and wrote up the new Japanese constitution, which required them to demilitarize in return for a bunch of US military bases and security guarantees. But the US had a bunch of communist ops in the neighborhood, so Japan rapidly re-industrialized by making a lot of equipment used by the US military during the Korean War. By the late 50s and 60s, Japan offered low-cost manufacturing and became a major trading partner with the US. They began to rapidly progress, developing new technology, building the first bullet trains, and rapidly improving manufacturing techniques, advancing robotics, while inventing just-in-time logistics and lean manufacturing principles. They already did this sort of rapid industrialization thing once before during the Meiji Restoration, so this was nothing new for Japan. Throughout all this growth, the American attitude towards Japan was of a quaint little country where cheap trinkets and toys were made. But in the 70s, cheaper Japanese steel and more reliable Japanese motorcycles and more fuel-efficient Japanese cars started to take market share away from American manufacturers. The oil crisis amplified this, and suddenly the giant American land yachts that got 6 mpg were unviable for the American consumer. American workers saw this new competition as a direct threat, and they were very vocal about their displeasure as Japan grew into our largest trading partner. Later, cheaper appliances and electronics started coming in from Japan, and American workers fully crashed out. Total nutty mode. Hating Japan became mainstream. American corporate executives saw an opportunity to gin up this racial animus towards the Japanese so they can try and destroy American unions because they didn't want to pay their own workers. And these American executives put all their energy into cost cutting instead of developing and designing modern products that the modern American consumers of the late 70s and early 80s actually wanted to buy. American car companies begrudgingly pumped out poorly designed, unreliable, slow, small cars that still managed to have terrible gas mileage, and surprise, nobody wanted to buy them. American steel companies insisted on using archaic, expensive, and inefficient integrated steel mills, while Japanese companies adopted arc furnace mills that use less space and can produce specialized alloys closer to manufacturing centers so they don't have to ship the finished steel all across the country. American manufacturing was not investing in R&D like the Japanese were. Processes were wasteful and inefficient, product quality was not great, and they were more focused on screwing over their own workers to stay profitable. Harley-Davidson went a different route and were very successful fending off Japanese competitors by modernizing their product, and I made a whole video about it, check it here. or here. I don't know where it goes. American steel companies had decades to adopt arc furnace steel manufacturing, the same way Germans and Japanese did in the 50s. American automakers continued to sell big V8s with choke down performance to meet emission standards that nobody liked.
With the Heliante, with the Helion, with the Heliberry, with the Heliburton.
Japanese and European car manufacturers are selling fast and fun cars with engines half the size, but American executives insisted on selling the same old stale cars.
What the hell? Oh my God!
American engineers weren't incapable of making fast, light, efficient, desirable cars. The corporate leadership just refused to adapt to the times. Lazy executives just blamed unions and complained about high pay and benefits and pointed everyone's anger towards the Japanese competitors to deflect from the fact that the people in charge of American companies were idiots with no imagination. By the 80s, Japan's economy was elite. Manufacturing was top tier. The product quality was immaculate. Development in robotics and semiconductors was the best in the world. So as the 80s rolled around, American workers were demanding that the US government hit back against Japan's record-breaking economic growth. And Reagan delivered. Throughout his 2 terms and H.W. Bush's 1 term, the conservative US government negotiated over 100 separate trade deals meant to upend the trade relationship we had with Japan. The motorcycle tariff of '81. The voluntary export restraints on Japanese steel and automobiles in '83, the Semiconductor Trade Agreement of '86, and other market-oriented, sector-specific negotiations that targeted different industries one by one, all to try and get Japan to buy more of our stuff and get them to sell less stuff to us. And none of it worked. Americans started to panic. It was starting to look like Japan's economy was unstoppable. Futuristic movies even used fictional Japanese companies to represent their imminent global takeover. Weyland Yutani in Alien, Kanemitsu Corporation in RoboCop 3, they made this sick robot assassin. Marty McFly's Japanese boss in Back to the Future 2.
McFly! Read my thoughts! Please, no, I cannot be fired. I'm fired.
Japanese imagery was used in Blade Runner to show that LA had been taken over by the Japanese. Right? Does Blade Runner take place in LA? I don't even know. Cyberpunk 2077 even made a callback to this trend of Japanese megacorps with the Arasaka Group. In reality, Japanese salarymen were just going to work using their excellent public transportation system, then going to an izakaya afterwards to crack some cold ones with the boys and smoke darts till midnight, and everyone was back in the office at 7 a.m. the next day. And the Japanese were all getting wealthy at the same time. They were living the American dream. The Japanese were painted as villains in fiction, but these were the real villains. The biggest Japan hater of them all was named Donald J. Trump. He lost an auction to a Japanese guy and resented the fact that a Japanese man was even wealthier than him in the first place. So he became the loudest cheerleader, calling for tariffs on Japanese steel and other imports, and he's been obsessed with tariffs ever since. The trade deficit remained throughout all of this. Why? Because Japan makes cool shit. This is cool. This is also very cool. These? Fucking sick. The American desire to have a kick-ass stereo system will override any patriotic fervor that exists in a man. Also, the US dollar was strong against the Japanese yen, and if you target Japanese automobile imports with tariffs and quotas, then it just makes all the other imports from Japan that much more affordable. PBS says this about the effectiveness of 80s trade deals with Japan. Trying to tamp down the trade deficit through negotiated import restrictions was like squeezing on a balloon. Motorcycle imports might get squeezed down after Washington slapped a de facto quota on Japanese motorcycle manufacturers, but then stereo imports would just increase. So in short, these guys ruined everything. Nixon and Burns had very different goals, and they beefed constantly. Burns would enact certain Fed policies with long-term goals, but they would clash with Nixon's short-term political goals, and he would force Burns to switch course, which is not how it's supposed to go. Tricky Dick would even plant negative stories about Burns in the press and threaten to limit the power of the Fed to push them to do what he wanted. Also, the Vietnam was enormously costly, and the oil crisis hit in '73, and then Watergate happened and Nixon resigned in '74, and it was just non-stop chaos. Also, the Suez Canal was closed from 1967 to 1975 because of regional conflicts, which interrupted global trade, and this led Europe to be upset about the Bretton Woods system, which governed the way international currency transactions were handled. So Nixon lost his mind and threw the Bretton Woods system out the window, which launched the global economy into a further turmoil. So in response, Japan bought up a lot of US currency to try and stabilize their own economy since it was strongly tied to the US economy. Nixon's crash out over the Bretton Woods system caused insane levels of inflation and a global recession and made Burns' job even more tough to manage. So working class people who initially applauded the move had to deal with deeper economic chaos, while Japan ended up with a ton of US dollars and bonds. The constant tug of war gave us high inflation, over 12% at one point. Compare that to our recent inflation situation, and at worst it got to 9%. After Burns, George Miller took over under Carter. He was a corporate guy with no economic or financial background, so he made things a lot worse, and then immediately dipped out after serving only 1 year in the role. In any situation, just remember, corporate guys make everything worse. So in '79, a new guy came in as Fed chair. He was actually a finance guy who worked at the Fed since the 1950s, so this guy actually knew the type of drastic action needed to fix the shit sandwich of an economy that he was handed. He upped the interest rate by a lot, peaking at 21% in 1981, which caused a short recession, and unemployment peaked at 10%. Volcker's plan eventually did get inflation under control, and the Fed started to ease the interest rates little by little. But they accomplished that by toppling unions and boosting the unemployment rate, forcing working class people to fight over lower paying jobs with fewer benefits. And this marked the end of the American dream and the beginning of the corporate billionaire takeover of America. These high interest rates drew foreign money, since they could just turn their money into American bonds, and the high interest rate would give them pretty decent and reliable returns, which increased demand for the American dollar, making it more powerful in comparison to other foreign currencies, allowing Americans to buy foreign-made goods for cheap. You get it? Japan had figured out that if they sell goods to the US, then take those American dollars and buy US bonds, they would make more money because of the high interest rates. And the increased demand on American dollars would keep the dollar value high against the yen, making it cheap for Americans to buy more Japanese goods. It was an infinite money glitch. All Japan had to do was keep making goods that Americans wanted to buy, and they had no problem doing that. And as a result of Nixon's Bretton Woods meltdown, Japan was already sitting on a ton of US dollars and bonds, so Volcker's interest rate boost made Japan massively wealthy overnight at the start of the 80s. They used that new wealth to invest in an already growing manufacturing base and improve product quality on all their exports. That's why the Japanese cars of the 80s and early 90s are so sick. Their engineering budget was nearly limitless. They were perfectly positioned to trade with the US and keep buying up even more bonds, and Nixon's mistakes and Volcker's interest rate scheme set the stage for Japan's economic ascent. Japan just made the most of the opportunity that was given to them. The American working class should have been mad at Nixon for being such a sweaty, idiot loser who broke the economy, but all the propaganda at the time pointed their anger at the Japanese instead. So that's what the global economy was like by 1986. The trade deals against Japan did nothing to slow imports, and the dollar was very valuable against foreign currencies. It turns out conservatives love capitalism until an Asian economy beats us at our own game. And beating us at our own game is something that Japan does pretty often, in fact. So in '86, the US convinced Japan and some Western European countries to get together for a little meeting at the Plaza Hotel to settle these trade issues. The goal was to lower the value of the dollar in relation to the French franc, the British pound, the Deutschmark, and the Japanese yen, with coordinated selling of American bonds, while the US bought up foreign bonds. Maybe Japan thought they could beat this like all the other trade deals, or maybe they were just being good allies to the US. Maybe the US was threatening to pull back their military support at the height of the Cold War. It's hard to say, but in the end, Japan agreed. So this is the time when the American government should have invested in American workers, expanded the social safety net, and supported American manufacturing and funded research. American corporations should have been investing in developing products that Americans wanted to buy. Most importantly, they should have increased pay so people can actually afford these American products. And they did none of that. So after the Plaza Accords, Reagan continued to cut taxes for rich people, destroy the American social safety net, and deregulate corporations. And most importantly, he helped corporations destroy unions. And Japan just continued buying US bonds and selling goods to the US. Reagan got mad and accused Japan of cheating in 1987, then levied a 100% tariff on Japanese goods, and the stock market crash we know as Black Monday occurred a few months later. Experts say that the Japanese tariffs had nothing to do with the record drop on Black Monday, and that early computerized trading went rogue and dumped stocks before people can get it under control, but I have a feeling that the tariffs disrupted the US economy just enough to contribute to the crash. But whatever, that's just my opinion. The decade of trade turmoil finally took its toll on the Japanese economy, and it began to collapse in the 90s in what they call the lost decade. And that's when China stepped in. So this is how China started to become our largest trading partner. Greedy business leaders just shifted the trade that they used to do with Japan and handed it over to China. We sabotaged an ally's economy and handed it over to a communist rival. Why? Because it was cheaper and easier and corporations are greedy. And how is this even possible? How did we do trade with a communist rival when we weren't doing that with Russia or Cuba or other communist countries? Who's at fault for that? Who made that happen? Doesn't that seem weird to you? Well, guess what? It was Nixon's fault again. Well, specifically Henry Kissinger under Nixon, who worked in the early 70s to try to normalize trade relationships with China, to try to lure them away from Russia. And that didn't work either. So China just picked up where Japan left off, selling us cheap goods, building up their manufacturing capacity, buying US bonds, investing in infrastructure and engineering development. It's the same infinite money glitch that Japan figured out a decade earlier. Corporate dickheads hated Japanese economic growth and handed manufacturing jobs to China because they didn't think the Chinese were smart enough to develop their own advanced products the way the Japanese just did, but they were wrong again. So that brings us to now. Trump's obsession with tariffs began with his jealousy of Japanese economic success, and he's bringing that same anti-Asian hatred and just directing it towards China. He's just trying to pull the same tricks that they played in the 80s, tricks we already know do not work. Tariffs, trade deals, a new Plaza Accords, I think they're calling it the Mar-a-Lago Accords, meant to purposely devalue the dollar. These people have no new ideas. It's boomer economics. Maybe the tariffs against the rest of the world were meant to strong-arm our allies into joining us and ganging up on China in a new sort of modern Plaza Accord kind of deal. Or maybe they already refused to join us and the tariffs are just revenge. Because nobody can understand where these numbers even came from. None of this makes any sense. These tariffs aren't going to work. We're already witnessing the damage that they're inflicting. The trade deals aren't happening. It takes years to negotiate a meaningful trade deal with a country. He cannot negotiate new deals with every country at the same time in the space of 90 days. And it looks like most countries are just like straight up ignoring him. There are 195 countries on Earth. What the fuck is this man even talking about? Politicians promising American jobs already lied to us the first time during the 80s when they're trying to pull all these deals against Japan. Why would we believe them this time? Jobs aren't coming back, and they aren't even promising jobs. They keep saying these jobs will be automated. So where does that leave us? And hold on a second, does Trump actually believe these dumbass Tesla robots can do the jobs? Did Elon scam Trump with these robots? Is that why he chased him out? Did he base his entire plan on these stupid Tesla scam robots? And most importantly, if Japan decides to sell off their bonds, they can single-handedly implode the US economy. And if they hold their US bonds while the rest of the world dumps theirs, it can only slow the bleeding for us and it'll damage their economy in the process. And why would Japan risk damaging their own economy just to help this guy out? He spent half his life attacking Japan. he's forcing another trade war with the entire world using the exact same tactics that destroyed the Japanese economy back in the 90s, and they're still feeling the effects of the Plaza Accords to this day. Japan has already declared their unity with China and South Korea in this trade war, which is an extraordinary thing if you know their history. And at the same time, we are speedrunning through 2 decades worth of all the bad ideas that ruined the 70s and 80s in the space of 100 days. The president bullying the Fed chair, runaway inflation, chaotic trade deals with our largest trade partner in Asia, nonsensical tariffs, false promises to our working class, tax cuts for the wealthy, destruction of unions, overestimating automation. These people are doing the same things that already crashed the economy once before. Word for word, bar for bar. We are headed towards our own lost decade, and this time, Japan is in the position of power over us, which is pretty ironic. And throughout everything, this is the guy sitting across the negotiating table with Japan. I want to be clear, China and Japan have the ability to dump $2 trillion in US treasuries. That's all you need to know. They won. We have nothing to counter that. China and Japan have Trump by the balls. We will see how everything plays out, but my advice is to pay close attention to what Japan is doing and you'll get an idea of why we may have already lost this trade war. And the empty store shelves and layoffs haven't even started yet. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll be very happy. And by the way, this guy isn't just a lifelong Japan hater, he's also famous for refusing to pay people that he owes money to. So if he directs the Fed to not pay out bonds when foreign governments start dumping them, that would be an extinction level event for us. Trump's reputation is already in the dumpster, but if he tries to pull the same scam using America's money and America's reputation, it will not end well for any of us. Maybe I can look back at this video a few months from now and laugh about how wrong I was. And again, I hope I am wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. But I am not feeling very confident right now. So in the time since I filmed this and started editing it, a lot has happened. The American delegation showed up in Switzerland unannounced to meet with China. Then they agreed to meet again in June. And then at that June meeting, Trump announced that a deal had been made, even though just like a basic framework had been agreed to. And then they announced that they're still going to meet again at some point in the future, even though a specific time and date hasn't really been announced. So by the time I post this, it looks like there's only been a couple of meaningful trade deals signed, and none of these deals put us in any better position than we were before this trade war started. Also, we're running out of time. Well, that is unless Trump signs another 90-day pause the way he did with the TikTok ban again, which is like the 3rd time at this point. And there's also the, fact that Homeland Security burned through millions of dollars deporting 4-year-olds and day laborers without any criminal record, and the Marines were deployed to La Cienega Avenue, and Israel got themselves involved into another regional conflict, which will disrupt trade, particularly the petroleum trade, even if we don't get involved. But if we do get involved, we're gonna be dealing with some serious trade fallout because of that. So yeah, at the very least, there's gonna be some high gas prices we might be looking at in the near future. Crazy times we're living in right now, and all of that, understandably, took away the focus off of the tariffs and trade deals. But what you really need to know is this. Trump's entire trade war is based on a concept called the Triffin Dilemma, which predicts that a large trade deficit will cause people to lose faith in the US dollar and an eventual economic collapse will happen because of it. Since the US dollar serves as the global reserve currency, it needs to run an account deficit to meet global demand, and we maintain that account deficit by running up a trade deficit. The Triffin Dilemma predicts that if the trade deficit gets too big, then people stop believing in the magic of the US dollar or something, and then people stop using the dollar. But here's the problem. The Triffin Dilemma was developed when the dollar was still on the Bretton Woods system. Remember that from earlier? Nixon threw us off the Bretton Woods system back in 1971. So the Triffin Dilemma doesn't even apply anymore. The rules have changed. And even if we were still on the Bretton Woods system, the Triffin Dilemma was just some idea that some guy had back in the day. It was never really proven. So that means Trump's entire tariff strategy is based on an irrational fear of a perceived weakness in a monetary system that doesn't even exist anymore. It's worse than boomer economics. It's like boogeyman economics. The entire globe is losing faith in the people leading us to the trade war. A trade war that never needed to happen. A trade war based on an outdated and flawed understanding of trade deficits. The Triffin Dilemma warns of a loss of faith in the US dollar due to trade deficits. But these idiots are causing countries to lose faith in the entire American economy. This is so stupid. These people are so stupid. Now let me finish this up so I can upload it before things change again. In the meantime, hit like, subscribe, share this with your friends, help me get to 1,000 subscribers so I can do a Q&A for everybody, and if you help me get to 1 million, I will run for mayor. See you in a few months.